story of Gaugamela really began in a small backwater of the ancient world, a region north of the Greek peninsula called Macedon. This mountainous region was considered barbaric by the Greeks because it was a monarchy, not a democracy. And from childhood on, the boys of Macedon, like Alexander, were raised to be warriors.
No! Pali! Pali, Nexarchis!
Alexander was familiar with the great heroes of Homeric legend, and he came from a society that valued those heroes. They reveled in anything which demonstrated their personal courage.
Alexander's father was King Philip of Macedon. A grizzled veteran of tribal wars, he was a student of the art of war. Philip's leadership and army unified the people of Macedon. He had made Alexander a cavalry commander at age 16. Philip was not only a brilliant statesman, but a brilliant innovator.
What Philip did was to remake Macedonia into the most powerful state in the ancient world.
He literally changed the way armies were organized and the way they fought.
Philip creates an army of professionals. He actually pays them, and pays them well.
With Macedon transformed into a regional power, Philip now intended to unify all of Greece under his command.
Strepis, Alexander.
The other formative force in the life of Alexander was his mother, Olympias. The daughter of a conquered king, she became Philip's bride as a spoil of war.
Her relationship with Philip was rocky at best.
She had sort of been cast aside in favor of another, more beautiful new wife. And so you might say Alexander had some resentment because he felt that his mother had been wrongfully denied a certain privileged place. Olympias might even have feared that this new wife would produce a son, who Philip would then favor as his heir, rather than favoring Alexander.
In 336 BC, destiny changed Alexander's life when Philip of Macedon was assassinated. For Macedon and the young Alexander, this would mean one thing. Philip's death did not stop the Macedonian plans for conquest. Just 20 years old, Alexander took control of the army and marched on Greece, which rebelled after Philip's death. Athens and the other city-states surrendered to the young king. The Macedonian army was unstoppable. Next, Alexander turned his attention east to Persia.
The Persian Empire was, in its day, the greatest empire in history. There had never been anything like this, as big as the Persian Empire, as organized as the Persian Empire. At its height, it stretched from the Indo-Pakistani border in the east all the way to Macedon, and in the south, it included Egypt. Persians and the Greeks had been at war in one way or another since about 550 BC, so for well over 200 years.
Persia had invaded Greece, had conquered Macedonia, had burned Athens to the ground, had violated the temples of the gods.
Alexander grew up with the idea that the ultimate grand prize was the Persian Empire.
In 334 BC, Alexander led his army of 45,000 men east into the lands claimed by the Empire of Persia. But the invasion was barely noticed by the Persian king.
Darius III was the great king of Persia. He came to the Persian throne in 336 BC.
Darius is told that Alexander and his army have breached Persian soil. The question now is what to do about it.
The Persians want to have an early victory against Alexander. Nip it in the bud. Fight him before he can advance far from where he's landed.
But the Persian strategy backfires. They're defeated at the Battle of Granicus, at the Battle of Issus, and at the Siege of Tyre. As Darius watched the surprising military success of the young general, he began to build up his army. But before a final showdown with Alexander, Darius decided to negotiate instead of fight.
Darius sent several notes to Alexander, offering him peace treaty and various terms. Alexander, in response, is said to have sent back letters saying, in effect, basically, why should I negotiate with you for something which already belongs to me?
Alejandro's prosterion grafi. Ine yata ta kremata katin korano tu pasan.
What was at stake at Gaugamela was the entire Persian Empire. If Alexander could bring Darius to battle and defeat him, he would lay honest claim to rule of the Persian Empire.
Kautitaja hijahaka abarana.
Gaugamela cruciata buzaraka.
Gagamela. Atistai, Adahan, Abarang, Agaugamela.
Darius had built an army from every corner of his empire, and as the Persian army began to move into place, Greek scouts reported that Darius's army was larger than anything they had ever seen before.
The estimates are actually all over the field, but we suspect that he probably had around 200 to 250,000 men on the field, which would have been about 5 times the size of Alexander's force.
The Macedonian army, we think we have fairly certain figures for. We're talking about 40,000 infantry of all types and about 7,000 cavalry.
Alexander's chief general is Parmenio, a seasoned cavalry commander.
Parmenio was one of Philip's most trusted generals. He was also of the old school. He was one of the only generals that regularly stood up and argued with Alexander.
And in some cases, Alexander would ask Parmenio for advice, knowing that he would get a conservative answer from Parmenio. And therefore, he would understand how a conservative commander would view a certain situation. And oftentimes, he would then use that information to develop a plan that would counter a conservative reaction.
The youthful Darius had expected an attack in the dark and left his army standing at the ready for the entire night. It was not a cohesive force, but a series of armed groups levied from the governors or satraps of every corner of the empire. Most Persian warriors wore no armor and no helmet. Each carried an 8-foot spear and a shield made of wicker. But what the Persian army lacked in armor and weapons, they made up for in numbers.
You think of the Persians, they're not a bunch of yahoos. The tactics that they're using have been effective for hundreds of years. The Persians have a huge empire. It's been good enough.
Against this enormous army, Alexander has one advantage. This professional army has the Macedonian phalanx. Captain Dale Dye, retired officer, historian, and film consultant, has studied the Macedonian approach to warfare.
The Macedonian phalanx, probably the most potent weapon of war in the ancient world. The phalanx, blocks of individuals, 256 men, arranged 16 across by 16 deep.
Once you were in the formation and going forward, you really had no choice as to whether you were going to go backwards or not. You were definitely going forward with this massive wall of human muscle and spear points, and that's what made it so overwhelming.
In the front rank were the most veteran fighters, the fighters who had proved their courage.